U.S. President Joe Biden is using his State of the Union address to launch a major U.S. aid initiative for Gaza. He's promising the U.S. military will build a floating pier on Gaza's Mediterranean coast and create a new route for relief supplies. The State of the Union is one of the most closely watched and painstakingly analyzed political speeches of the year in American politics. In it, Biden also sends a message to the Israeli government about Gaza and the humanitarian crisis there.
Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire. To the leadership of Israel, I say this: humanitarian assistance cannot be a secondary consideration or a bargaining chip. Protecting and saving innocent lives has to be a priority.
Right now, Biden's plan for that floating pier off Gaza is just being sketched out. Specialized teams from the U.S. military would build it. White House officials say it would take at least 30 days before it's operational, and it would be built with the cooperation of other countries in the region. Officials with humanitarian aid organizations say there are a number of other logistical questions to work out as well, including around how the food and other aid will be distributed within Gaza. In a development just this morning, the European Union says it's launching a boat lift of food into Gaza. The EU president says the U.S. and the United Arab Emirates are part of that plan. A test shipment could sail as early as today, and ships are expected to start carrying food from Cyprus to Gaza as of this weekend. Let us take you now live to Jerusalem. Margaret Evans now back and leading a CBC News team in the region to cover the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. Margaret, good to see you as you make your third trip there to begin or to continue covering this for us. Appreciate some time with you this morning. That plan that I was just talking about in some detail, the announcement from Joe Biden last night in the State of the Union address that the U.S. is looking to build that floating pier off Gaza to enable more aid to get into the region. Has there been any reaction to that proposal there thus far?
Yeah, well, the Israelis have welcomed it, and it's actually been something that they've been talking about since December. One of the Israeli ministers had gone over and actually was in Cyprus talking about this kind of maritime corridor, and of the language coming out of the Israeli government is that Israel will work in close cooperation with the Americans to ensure that this can happen. But there's also a lot of confusion as well, as you might expect in this part of the world and at this particular time. If you look at the language coming out of the European Commission, they say that they're going to help. You're talking about these kind of boats coming in. They're saying they're going to continue to insist with Israel that it improve land access into Gaza, something that hasn't happened in all these months of war. So critics here are saying, well, if you've insisted thus far for Israel to open the borders to more trucks getting in on the ground, the easiest and fastest option, what makes you think by having Israeli check in Cyprus and then putting aid on boats is going to make it move any faster? What happens when it gets on to the shore? Because we've seen those chaotic scenes, a week or two ago when the aid trucks came in and people kind of surrounded the trucks. They're so desperate in northern Gaza for the food. Israeli troops on the ground opened fire at a certain point, and we saw a lot of people die. We were even seeing people being injured, and 2 reports this morning of 2 deaths in northern Gaza with people being hit by, aids being dropped out of the back of planes and parachuted down. So there are a lot of unanswered questions here. And there, I asked one man this morning here in the Old City, a Palestinian man, what do you think of this plan? He said, well, I don't trust anything the Americans do. They're only interested in supporting Israel and its efforts to get the Israeli hostages out. And another woman said, there are lots of borders between Israel and Gaza. Why don't they simply open them up?
Margaret, when you mention the Old City, there you are in front of the Damascus Gate, which is the oldest gate of the Old City of Jerusalem. And I know you've been speaking to people there. So let's talk about the mood. Ceasefire talks are stalled. Ramadan begins on Sunday, and we're seeing new signals that an Israeli ground offensive into Rafah in the south of Gaza will, in fact, happen. So what are you seeing and hearing there now?
Well, right now you can maybe hear the sound of kids playing behind me outside Damascus Gate. This is one of the main entrances for Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem when they go in to pray at the Aqsa Mosque. And so it's a bit different than it was a few hours ago because the Israeli security presence is very heavy here. It's a reminder of the tensions right now. And of course, as Palestinians prepare to celebrate the holy month of Ramadan, there's a reluctance to celebrate because of what's happening to their brethren in Gaza. People have told us they're not going to be decorating their houses. People will be thinking about how to help people in Gaza. So the mood is really one of worry. And of course, there were hopes for a ceasefire. The hopes held dearly also by Israelis who still have hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas and other militant groups. They're going to be holding another rally in Tel Aviv tomorrow. It's going to focus on 19 Israeli women still being held hostage in recognition of International Women's Day. So lots of tension, lots of disappointed hopes in terms of the ceasefire, but some people still hope that it can and will happen in the days ahead.
Margaret, as I mentioned, this is your third reporting assignment on this occasion to cover the war, and things have worsened even since your last visit. So let's talk about the increasingly dire conditions inside Gaza, especially for hospitals and patients. Share with us some of your reporting, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, CBC News, in fact, all week, colleagues have been reporting on the fear of famine in northern Gaza, in particular, the impact of this conflict on the civilian population in Gaza, just devastating. Before we came on this trip, we interviewed a researcher from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He was part of a report commissioned by the British Foreign Office to look at the scenarios for excess deaths if there isn't a ceasefire. And some of their reporting is really grim indeed. They said that if there were a ceasefire in place today, you would still, over the next 6 months, see an excess death rate of 6,000 more people than you would normally see in that period of time. So what they're looking at is not just people who are killed in the bombing, the shelling, and the conflict. They're looking at underlying conditions and the impact of this war on a healthcare system that they say is really completely collapsed. So people who can't get full kidney dialysis treatment, people who were diagnosed with cancer and have had to have their treatment, such as it was in Gaza before, completely stopped. So they're projecting what the death rate would be down into the future. They did 3 scenarios: if there's a ceasefire now, if things continued as they were, and if there was an escalation. And basically we had an interview with a co-author of the report who said if there were a ceasefire today, you would have 75,000 less deaths than you would have down the road. But his primary concern was malnutrition, acute malnutrition amongst children in particular, and he mentioned the need to get aid into northern Gaza very quickly. Have a listen to what he had to say.
Our models project that the rates of acute malnutrition in children particularly would skyrocket and become really catastrophic. Even acute malnutrition in the short term is really difficult to reverse. It's a bit like a super tanker that you're trying to slow down.
So, the images that we see of starving kids coming out are going to put pressure both on the Israeli government in terms of the humanitarian situation, but it will put pressure on Hamas too. And we are hearing some reports of internal divisions between Ismail Haniyeh, the political head of Hamas in Qatar, and the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, in Gaza itself. So pressure on both sides to get a ceasefire in place. Israel has said, the Israeli Prime Minister has said, he's not prepared to stop or agree to a permanent ceasefire because it would mean awarding a win to Hamas, something he said he won't allow to happen.
Margaret, thank you very much for this conversation. That excerpt that you played for us, that was part of your feature report on The National last night. I'll direct people to our YouTube channel, CBC's YouTube channel and The National there. They want to see your full report. Thank you again. Margaret Evans at the Damascus Gate in the Old City of Jerusalem.